The gold band caught the dying sunlight as it lay half buried in the dusty trail outside Pinos Altos, New Mexico, and Zane Irwin's heart stopped when he recognized the delicate engraving along its edge. He'd been riding hard for 3 days straight, chasing rumors of a cattle-rustling gang that had hit ranches from Socorro to Silver City, but something made him pull his horse to a halt and dismount. The ring was small, clearly made for a woman's hand, and when he rubbed the dirt away, he could make out tiny flowers etched into the metal and what looked like initials on the inside. TW, it read, along with another set of initials he couldn't quite make out, worn smooth by time or perhaps intentionally scratched away. Zane turned the ring over in his calloused fingers, feeling an inexplicable pull in his chest. He was 24 years old, had spent the last 6 years working as a ranch hand and occasional deputy, and had never been the sentimental type. His mother had died when he was young, and his father had raised him to be practical, logical, focused on survival rather than emotion. Yet something about this ring felt important, as though finding it meant something larger than chance. He glanced around the empty trail, noting the wagon tracks and hoofprints that crisscrossed the dirt road. Pinos Altos was a mining town that had seen better days since the initial gold rush of 1860, and it was now 1873. The town still drew prospectors, gamblers, and those looking to make their fortune, but it also attracted desperate folks running from something or towards something they hoped would save them. Zane pocketed the ring and mounted his horse again, riding the last mile into town as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. The main street was quiet, with only a few souls wandering between the saloon and the general store. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and went inside, finding Sheriff Garrett hunched over a stack of papers, his gray mustache twitching as he squinted at the handwriting. "Any luck with those rustlers?" Garrett asked without looking up. "Trail went cold near the Gila River," Zane said, pulling out the ring. "Found this on the road outside town. Figure someone might be looking for it." Garrett finally looked up, his weathered face showing interest. "Wedding ring, by the looks of it. Could belong to anyone passing through. We get dozens of folks every week." "The initials are TW," Zane said. "Might help narrow it down." The sheriff shrugged. "Leave it here. If someone comes asking, I'll return it to them. Otherwise, it's yours after a month, I suppose." Zane hesitated, then shook his head. "I'll hold on to it. Ask around myself." He couldn't explain why he wanted to keep the ring, why the thought of handing it over to Sheriff Garrett felt wrong. That night, he took a room at the boarding house and lay awake, the ring resting on the small table beside his bed. In the lamplight, he could see how the flowers had been carved with care, how despite the wear the ring had been made with love. The next morning, Zane began his search in earnest. He started at the general store, where Martha Henderson, the owner's wife, examined the ring with keen eyes. "Pretty piece," she said, "but I don't recognize it. You might try asking at the church. Reverend Porter keeps records of marriages, births, deaths. If this belonged to a woman married in these parts, he'd know." Zane thanked her and walked to the small wooden church at the edge of town. Reverend Porter was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He looked through his ledgers, running his finger down columns of names. "We've had several women with the initials TW married here over the years," he said finally. "Tessa Walsh, married in 68. Tabitha Wright, married in 70. And there was a Temperance Wilcox, but she moved to California with her husband 2 years back. Any of them lose their rings? Not that I heard, but then, people don't always report such things. They either keep searching or accept the loss as God's will." Zane visited the saloon next, then the hotel, then the mining office. No one recognized the ring or knew of anyone searching for it. Days turned into weeks, and Zane found himself spending every spare moment asking questions, following leads that went nowhere. The ranch where he worked was patient with his distraction, but eventually his boss called him in. "Zane, you're a good hand, but your mind hasn't been here for a month. What's going on?" Zane pulled out the ring, now wrapped in a piece of soft cloth to protect it. "Found this. Trying to find who it belongs to." His boss, a gruff man named Walter, studied the ring and shook his head. "Son, this territory is big. That ring could have come from anywhere, been carried here by wind, water, or wagon. The woman who lost it might be 100 miles away by now." "Maybe," Zane agreed, "but I have to try." Walter sighed. "I can't keep paying a man who's not fully here. You want to chase this, that's your choice, but I need hands who'll focus on the work." Zane understood. He collected his wages and left the ranch that afternoon, his belongings packed in his saddlebags, the ring secure in his shirt pocket. He had some money saved, enough to last a few months if he was careful. He would search the neighboring towns, ask questions, follow any thread that might lead him to the woman who had lost this ring. His first stop was Silver City, a larger town 20 miles northwest. The journey took him through rugged terrain, past abandoned mine shafts and scattered homesteads. Silver City was bustling compared to Pinos Altos, with multiple saloons, hotels, and even a newspaper office. Zane went to the newspaper first, thinking perhaps someone had placed an advertisement about a lost ring. The editor, a harried man named Phillips, let him look through back issues, but Zane found nothing. He spent 3 days in Silver City, talking to shopkeepers, hotel clerks, and anyone who would listen. A woman at the boarding house thought she remembered someone asking about a lost ring months earlier, but couldn't recall any details. From Silver City, Zane traveled to Georgetown, then to Hillsborough, each town bringing new faces and new dead ends. He took odd jobs to keep money in his pocket, working as a stable hand, a store clerk, even helping with a barn raising. Everywhere he went, he asked about the ring, showed it to anyone who seemed interested. Months passed, and 1873 gave way to 1874. Zane celebrated his 25th birthday alone in a small town called Chloride, eating a plate of beans in a dingy saloon while miners argued over card games. He pulled out the ring that night, as he did every evening, studying it in the lamplight, wondering if he was a fool. "That's a pretty thing," a voice said. Zane looked up to see an older woman, her face lined with years of hard living, standing beside his table. "May I?" He handed her the ring, and she examined it carefully. "My daughter had a ring like this, not exactly the same, but similar. Her husband gave it to her before he went off to war, never came back. She wore that ring every day until the day she died." "I'm sorry," Zane said softly. "Why are you carrying it around, looking for the woman who lost it?" The woman smiled sadly. "That's a kind thing to do. Most men would have sold it by now or given it to their sweetheart, but you're searching for a stranger." Why? Zane had asked himself that question 100 times. Because she might be searching for it too. Because it clearly meant something to someone. "Because I think finding it wasn't an accident." The woman handed the ring back. "Then I hope you find her, and I hope she's worth all this effort." Zane continued his search through New Mexico territory, then into Arizona territory. He worked on cattle drives in mining camps, anywhere that would pay him enough to keep moving. He asked about the ring in Tucson, in Tombstone, in tiny settlements that barely warranted names. People thought he was crazy, obsessed, wasting his life on an impossible quest. In the spring of 1875, Zane found himself in El Paso, Texas, broke and exhausted. He'd been searching for nearly 2 years and was no closer to finding the ring's owner than when he started. He took a job at a freight company, loading and unloading wagons, the work hard enough to make him sleep dreamlessly at night. One evening, he was having dinner at a small restaurant when a man at the next table overheard him asking the owner about the ring. "TW, you said?" the man asked. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, with the look of a professional gambler. "I knew a woman with those initials, Tessa Walsh. She was married to a man named Victor Walsh, a real piece of work, ran a small ranch outside Santa Fe." Zane's heart quickened. "Do you know if she's still there?" "Last I heard, her husband died about 3 years back. Don't know what became of her after that. But if you're heading to Santa Fe, you might ask around." Santa Fe was back in New Mexico territory, and Zane felt a mixture of hope and frustration. He'd passed through Santa Fe briefly over a year ago, but hadn't thought to search there extensively. He gave notice at the freight company and prepared for the long journey north. The ride to Santa Fe took 2 weeks, and Zane arrived in early summer. The city was the territorial capital, larger and more established than most places he'd searched. He started at the land office, looking for records of a Victor and Tessa Walsh. The clerk found the information quickly. Victor Walsh died in 1870. The ranch was sold in 1871 to pay debts. Tessa Walsh signed the sale papers, but there's no record of where she went afterward. Any family? Friends? "I wouldn't know, sir. You might try the church records." Zane visited 3 different churches before finding one where the priest remembered Tessa Walsh. "Quiet woman," Father Doming said. "She came to Mass regularly when her husband was alive, less so after. I heard she left Santa Fe after selling the ranch. Some said she went to Denver, others said she moved back east. She had no family here that I knew of." Denver was in Colorado territory, hundreds of miles away, but Zane had come too far to stop now. He worked in Santa Fe for 3 months, saving money for the journey, then headed north in the fall of 1875. Denver was a booming city, growing rapidly with the mining industry and railroad connections. Zane felt overwhelmed by the size of it, the noise and crowds so different from the small towns he was used to. He started his search at the employment agencies, figuring a woman alone would need work. It took weeks of asking, but finally, a woman at a boarding house for working women recognized the description. Tessa Walsh. Yes, she stayed here briefly in 71, worked as a seamstress for a few months, then left. Said she was going to visit a cousin in St. Louis. St. Louis seemed impossibly far away, almost back to the Mississippi River, and Zane felt his resolve wavering. He was 26 years old now, had spent nearly 3 years searching for a woman he'd never met, following a trail that grew colder with each passing month. He sat in a Denver saloon one night, the ring on the table before him, and wondered if the old woman in chloride had been right to question his sanity. But then he remembered the careful engraving on the ring, the love that had clearly gone into its creation, and he couldn't give up. Not yet. The journey to St. Louis took most of the winter. Zane worked his way east, taking jobs on ranches and farms, slowly accumulating enough money to keep moving. By the time he reached St. Louis in the spring of 1876, he had less than $50 to his name and a growing fear that he would never find Tessa Walsh. St. Louis was the largest city Zane had ever seen, with buildings several stories high, paved streets, and more people than he could count. He felt out of place in his worn cowboy clothes, his sun-darkened skin and trail dust marking him as a Westerner. He started his search at the city hall, looking for any record of Tessa Walsh. After days of bureaucratic runarounds, he finally found a clerk who was willing to help. "Walsh is a common name," the clerk said, "but I'll check our records for any Tessa Walsh who might have arrived in the past few years." The search took hours, but eventually the clerk found something. "There's a Theresa Walsh listed as a resident at the Elmwood boarding house for women on 4th Street. Arrived in 1871, according to the records. Could be your person." Zane's hands trembled as he wrote down the address. After 3 years of searching, he might finally be close to finding her. He walked through the city streets, following the clerk's directions, until he stood before a well-maintained 3-story house with a sign reading Elmwood Boarding House. He knocked on the door, and an older woman answered, her expression guarded. "I'm looking for Theresa Walsh," Zane said. "Or Tessa Walsh. Is she here?" The woman's expression softened slightly. "May I ask why you're looking for her?" Zane pulled out the ring, still wrapped in its cloth. "I found this nearly 3 years ago in New Mexico territory. I've been searching for the woman who lost it." The woman's eyes widened. "You've been searching for 3 years?" "Yes, madam." She opened the door wider. "Come in. I'm Mrs. Elmwood, the proprietor. Tessa does live here, but she's at work right now. She works as a seamstress at a shop on 5th Street, Peterson's Fine Clothing." Zane thanked her and hurried to 5th Street, his heart pounding. Peterson's Fine Clothing was a modest shop with dresses and suits displayed in the window. He pushed open the door, a bell chiming overhead, and a middle-aged man looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Tessa Walsh. She's in the back working. Is this about an order? It's personal." The man hesitated, then called toward the back room. "Tessa, someone here to see you." Zane heard footsteps, and then a woman appeared in the doorway. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style, brown eyes that held both warmth and wariness, and a face that was pretty despite lines of worry around her eyes. She wore a simple gray dress with a white collar, and her hands showed the calluses of hard work. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but uncertain. Zane removed his hat, suddenly nervous. "Are you Tessa Walsh, from New Mexico territory?" Her expression became guarded. "I was. Who are you?" He pulled out the ring, unwrapping it carefully. "My name is Zane Irwin. I found this on a trail outside Pinos Altos in the summer of 1873. I've been searching for you ever since." The color drained from Tessa's face. She stared at the ring, her hand slowly rising to cover her mouth. That's my ring. I lost it when Victor and I were traveling. I searched for days, but..." Her voice broke, and tears filled her eyes. Zane held out the ring. "I believe this belongs to you." Tessa took the ring with shaking hands, holding it as though it were made of glass. "I can't believe you found it. I can't believe you searched for so long." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because it clearly meant something to you," Zane said simply. "And because I thought maybe you were looking for it too." The shop owner coughed politely. "Tessa, why don't you take the rest of the afternoon off? This seems like an important moment." Tessa nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." She looked at Zane. "There's a small park a few blocks from here. Would you walk with me?" They walked in silence until they reached a quiet park with benches beneath oak trees. Tessa sat down, still clutching the ring, and Zane sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You must think I'm foolish for crying over a ring," Tessa said quietly. "No, madam. I think it must mean a great deal to you." She was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak. "This ring was my mother's. She died when I was 16, and it was the only thing I had left of her. When I married Victor, I wore it as my wedding ring because I couldn't afford one of my own, and I wanted my mother to be part of the day, even if she couldn't be there. Your mother's initials are T.W. as well, Theresa Walsh. I was named after her. I married a distant cousin, so my surname didn't change." She turned the ring over in her fingers. My marriage to Victor was not a happy one. He was cruel, drank too much, and spent what little money we had on gambling. When he died, I felt relief more than grief, and that guilt has stayed with me. But losing this ring felt like losing my mother all over again. It was the one thing Victor couldn't take from me, the one piece of love I had left. "I'm sorry you went through that," Zane said softly. Tessa looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "You spent 3 years searching for me. You crossed territories, followed a trail that must have gone cold 100 times. Why? What made you keep going?" Zane had thought about this question often during his long search. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. At first, it just seemed like the right thing to do. But as time went on, I felt like finding you was something I was meant to do, like the universe put that ring in my path for a reason. Do you believe in fate?" I didn't used to, but I think I might now. They sat in silence, watching children play in the distance, the spring afternoon warm and bright around them. "Tell me about your journey," Tessa said finally. "I want to know what you went through to find me." So Zane told her everything. He described finding the ring outside Pinos Altos, the months of searching through New Mexico territory, his travels to Arizona and Texas, the long journey north to Denver, and then east to St. Louis. He told her about the people he'd met, the jobs he'd worked, the times he'd nearly given up but kept going. Tessa listened with rapt attention, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she shook her head in wonder. "I don't know anyone who would have done what you did. Most people would have sold the ring or kept it for themselves. It wasn't mine to sell or keep. Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me back this piece of my mother. Thank you for caring enough to search. You're welcome." Zane stood, suddenly feeling awkward. "I should let you get back to your day. I'm glad I finally found you." "Wait," Tessa said, standing as well. "You've traveled all this way. At least let me buy you dinner. It's the least I can do." Zane hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They went to a small restaurant near the boarding house, and over plates of roast chicken and potatoes, they continued talking. Tessa told him about her life in St. Louis, how she'd built a quiet existence working as a seamstress, living in the boarding house with other working women, attending church on Sundays. "It's not an exciting life," she admitted, "but it's peaceful. After years of Victor's anger and unpredictability, I cherish peace." "Peace is underrated," Zane agreed. "I grew up with it, lost it when my mother died and my father became bitter, found it again working on ranches under the open sky." "What will you do now?" Tessa asked. "Now that you've completed your quest?" "I haven't thought that far ahead. I suppose I'll head back west, find work on a ranch again. It's what I know." "When will you leave?" "In a day or two, once I've rested and resupplied." Tessa looked disappointed, though she tried to hide it. "Of course, you must be eager to return to your life." But Zane found himself reluctant to leave. Over the past 3 years, finding Tessa had become his purpose, his driving force. Now that he'd found her, the thought of simply walking away felt wrong. "Would you mind if I stayed in St. Louis for a week or so?" he asked. "I'd like to see the city, and I don't have anywhere I need to be immediately." Tessa's face brightened. "I'd like that. I could show you around if you'd like. I've lived here for 5 years now, so I know it fairly well." Over the next week, Tessa became Zane's guide to St. Louis. She showed him the riverfront, where massive steamboats loaded and unloaded cargo. They visited the market, where vendors sold everything from fresh produce to imported silks. They walked through parks, attended a concert, and spent hours simply talking. Zane found himself fascinated by Tessa. She was intelligent, kind, and possessed a quiet strength that came from surviving hardship. She had a gentle sense of humor and a way of seeing beauty in small things: a bird singing, a child laughing, the way sunlight filtered through leaves. Tessa, for her part, found herself drawn to Zane in a way she hadn't expected. After her terrible marriage to Victor, she'd convinced herself she was done with men, that she was better off alone. But Zane was different from any man she'd known. He was patient, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in what she had to say. He treated her with respect and kindness, never trying to control or diminish her. One evening, as they sat by the Mississippi River watching the sun set, Tessa said, "You're not really going back west, are you?" Zane was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. The truth is, I don't have anything pulling me back. No family, no job waiting for me. I could find work here just as easily as in New Mexico." "Would you want to stay? In St. Louis, I mean." He turned to look at her. "Would you want me to?" Tessa's cheeks flushed. "I know we've only known each other a week. I know it's probably too soon to say such things, but I feel like I've known you longer. You spent 3 years searching for me, and in a way, I feel like we've been connected all that time, even when we didn't know each other." "I feel the same way," Zane admitted. "From the moment I found your ring, I felt connected to you. I know it sounds strange." "No," Tessa said softly. "It doesn't sound strange at all." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the river, the lights of the city beginning to glow in the twilight. "I should probably tell you something," Tessa said after a while. "After Victor died, I promised myself I would never marry again. I told myself I was better off alone, that I could take care of myself and didn't need a man to complete me. That's a fair promise to make, after what you went through. But being with you this week has made me question that promise. You've shown me that not all men are like Victor, that there are good men in the world, men who are kind and patient and who see women as equals rather than property." Zane reached over and gently took her hand. "Tessa, I'm not asking you to break any promises or make any commitments. But I would like to stay in St. Louis for a while longer. I'd like to get to know you better, to spend more time with you, and whatever happens, happens at whatever pace feels right for both of us." Tessa squeezed his hand. "I'd like that too." Zane found work at a freight company on the riverfront, loading and unloading cargo from the steamboats. The work was hard but paid well, and he took a room at a boarding house for men a few blocks from where Tessa lived. They began courting properly, with Zane calling on Tessa at the boarding house, taking her to dinner, accompanying her to church on Sundays. Mrs. Elmwood, the boarding house proprietor, approved of the match. "That young man crossed half the country to return your ring," she said to Tessa. "That's the kind of devotion most women only dream of." The other women at the boarding house were equally supportive, happy to see Tessa, who had been so withdrawn and sad when she first arrived, finally smiling and laughing again. As summer turned to fall in 1876, Zane and Tessa's relationship deepened. They spent every free moment together, talking about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Zane told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about his mother's death and his father's subsequent bitterness, about the loneliness of drifting from job to job with no real home or purpose. Tessa shared more about her difficult marriage, about the fear she'd lived with daily, never knowing what mood Victor would be in or whether he'd come home drunk and angry. She told Zane about the relief she'd felt when Victor died, followed immediately by crushing guilt for feeling that relief. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Zane told her firmly. "He treated you terribly. You're allowed to be grateful that the suffering ended. The church says I should have honored my vows, that marriage is sacred no matter what. The church also says husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church. Victor broke his vows long before you felt any relief at his death." Tessa felt something inside her begin to heal, a wound she'd carried for years finally starting to close. Zane's words, his understanding, his refusal to judge her, gave her a freedom she'd never experienced. In October, Zane asked Tessa to marry him. They were walking through the park where they'd first really talked, the trees ablaze with fall colors. He didn't have a fancy ring, just a simple gold band he'd bought with his saved wages. "I know I'm not wealthy," he said as he knelt before her. "I can't offer you a big house or fancy things, but I can offer you love, respect, and partnership. I will never raise my hand to you, never speak to you with cruelty, never try to control or diminish you. I will work hard to provide for us, and I will cherish you every day of my life. Tessa Walsh, will you marry me?" Tessa was crying, but these were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in November of 1876 at the same church Tessa had been attending. Mrs. Elmwood and the other boarding house women attended, as did several of Zane's co-workers from the freight company. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with genuine love and happiness. For their wedding, Tessa wore her mother's ring on her right hand and Zane's ring on her left. After the ceremony, Zane gave her a gift, a delicate gold chain. "So you can wear your mother's ring around your neck," he explained. "That way it's always close to your heart, but you don't have to worry about losing it." Tessa threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "I'm the lucky one," Zane replied. "I found a ring in the dust and it led me to you." They rented a small house on the outskirts of St. Louis, nothing fancy but theirs. Tessa continued working as a seamstress while Zane worked at the freight company. They saved their money carefully, dreaming of one day returning west and buying a small ranch. Their first year of marriage was blissfully happy. Zane proved to be everything he'd promised: kind, respectful, hardworking. He helped with cooking and cleaning, never expecting Tessa to do all the domestic work alone. He encouraged her to pursue her interests, even buying her books from the market when he could afford it. Tessa blossomed under Zane's love and care. The worry lines around her eyes faded, replaced by laugh lines. She smiled more, laughed more, and began to believe that happiness wasn't just a fleeting thing but something she could actually have and keep. In the spring of 1878, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. Zane was overjoyed, though Tessa felt a flutter of fear. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she confessed one night as they lay in bed. "What if I can't protect our child the way my mother protected me?" "You'll be an amazing mother," Zane assured her. "You're kind, patient, and loving. And you won't be doing this alone. I'll be right here beside you." Their son was born in December of 1878, a healthy baby with Tessa's dark hair and Zane's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Tessa's father who had died when she was young. Holding Thomas in his arms for the first time, Zane felt a love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This tiny person, this perfect combination of him and Tessa, was depending on him for everything. He made a silent vow to be the kind of father he'd wished he had, to raise Thomas with love and patience and kindness. Tessa proved to be a devoted mother, though the early months were exhausting. Zane helped as much as he could, walking Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers, doing whatever was needed. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Zane and Tessa continued saving money, their dream of returning west and buying a ranch growing stronger. They talked about it often, planning what kind of place they wanted, what kind of life they hoped to build. "I want somewhere peaceful," Tessa said. "Somewhere Thomas can grow up with space to run and clean air to breathe, but not too isolated. I want to be part of a community." "Maybe we could find a place near Pinos Altos," Zane suggested. That's where I found your ring, where this all started. It would feel like completing a circle." Tessa liked that idea. Going home in a way, but to a new home we build together. In 1880, when Thomas was 2 years old, they had saved enough money. Zane made inquiries and learned that a small ranch outside Pinos Altos was for sale. The previous owner had died, and his widow was moving back east to live with family. The price was reasonable, and the property included a modest house, a barn, and enough land to run a small herd of cattle. They made the journey west in the spring, traveling by train to New Mexico Territory and then by wagon to Pinos Altos. The town had changed little in the 7 years since Zane had found the ring. It was still small, still dusty, still surrounded by the rugged beauty of the mountains. The ranch was everything they'd hoped for. The house needed work, but it was solid. The land was good, with access to water and decent grazing. Zane immediately began making plans for repairs and improvements, while Tessa started turning the house into a home. Their nearest neighbors were the Johnsons, an older couple who ran a larger ranch a few miles away. Mrs. Johnson was delighted to have another woman nearby and quickly became a friend and mentor to Tessa, teaching her the ins and outs of ranch life. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was good work. Zane built up a small herd of cattle, buying young stock and breeding them carefully. Tessa kept a garden, chickens, and helped with the ranch work when needed. Thomas thrived in the open spaces, growing strong and healthy. In the summer of 1881, Tessa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Teresa after Tessa's mother, though they called her Essie to avoid confusion. Essie was a quiet baby, content to observe the world with solemn brown eyes. The family settled into a comfortable rhythm. Zane worked the ranch with the help of a hired hand, a young man named Miguel who was reliable and hardworking. Tessa managed the household and helped with the cattle during busy times. Thomas, now 3 years old, followed his father everywhere, already learning about ranching. One evening in the fall of 1882, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Tessa said, "Do you ever think about that day you found my ring? About what your life would have been like if you just left it in the dust?" Zane pulled her closer. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be drifting from job to job, no real purpose or home. I wouldn't have you, wouldn't have Thomas and Essie. I wouldn't have this life we've built. I think about it too. If you hadn't found my ring, hadn't spent 3 years searching for me, I'd probably still be in St. Louis, living alone in that boarding house, working as a seamstress, convinced I was better off without love. I never would have known what real happiness felt like. Funny how a small piece of metal can change everything." "It wasn't the ring," Tessa said softly. "It was you. Your kindness, your determination, your heart. The ring was just what brought us together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Essie how to stack rocks, his little hands patient as she knocked them down again and again, giggling. "We should tell them the story when they're older," Zane said, "about how their father found their mother's ring in the dust and searched for years to return it. They'll think it's a fairy tale. Maybe it is. A Western fairy tale, where the cowboy's quest ends not with gold or glory but with love." As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Zane proved to be an excellent rancher, building their herd and earning a reputation for quality cattle. Tessa became known in the community for her kindness and her skill as a seamstress, making and mending clothes for neighbors in exchange for goods and services. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He learned quickly, eager to help his father with every task. Essie was gentler, preferring to help her mother in the garden or care for the chickens, though she could ride a horse as well as any ranch hand by the time she was 6. In 1884, Tessa gave birth to their third child, another son they named James. James was the most adventurous of their children, constantly getting into mischief and keeping his parents on their toes. The family became pillars of the small Pinos Altos community. Zane served on the town council, helping to make decisions about roads, schools, and other civic matters. Tessa helped organize church socials and taught Sunday school. Their home was known for its hospitality, with friends and neighbors always welcome at their table. One day in the spring of 1886, Sheriff Garrett, now quite elderly and near retirement, stopped by the ranch. He and Zane sat on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about old times. "You remember when you first came to my office with that ring?" Garrett asked. "I thought you were crazy wanting to find the owner. I figured you'd give up after a week or two." "I almost did give up many times," Zane admitted, "but something kept pushing me forward." "Well, I'm glad it did. You and Tessa are good people and you've built something solid here. This community is better for having you in it." After the sheriff left, Tessa came out and sat beside Zane. "What were you two talking about?" "The ring. How he thought I was crazy for searching." "You were a little crazy," Tessa said with a smile, "but I'm grateful for it every single day." That night, after the children were asleep, Zane and Tessa lay in bed talking about the future. "Thomas will be 8 soon," Zane said. "Old enough to take on more responsibility around the ranch. I think in a few years he'll be ready to help with the cattle drives. He'll love that. He worships you, you know, wants to be just like his father. I just hope I'm setting a good example." "You are," Tessa assured him. "You're showing him what it means to be a good man, to work hard, treat people with respect, love your family. Those are the most important lessons." "What about you? Are you happy here? Do you ever miss St. Louis?" Tessa considered this. "I miss Mrs. Elmwood and some of the other women from the boarding house. I miss the convenience of having shops nearby, but this is home now. This ranch, this life, you and the children, this is everything I need." They made love that night with the tender passion of a long married couple, their bodies familiar and cherished. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the sounds of the New Mexico night crickets chirping, a coyote howling in the distance, the wind sighing through the pines. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive. Zane expanded their operation, buying more land and increasing their herd. He hired additional hands, including a young Mexican vaquero named Carlos who became like family to them. Thomas proved himself to be a natural rancher, with an instinct for cattle and a work ethic that made his father proud. By the time he was 12, he was doing the work of a grown man, and doing it well. Essie developed her mother's skill with sewing and began making beautiful quilts that she sold at the market in Silver City. She was quiet but strong-willed, with definite opinions about how things should be done. James remained the wild one, always climbing trees, chasing after wild animals, getting into scrapes. He gave Tessa more than a few gray hairs, but his joy and enthusiasm were infectious. In 1889, Tessa gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Rose. Rose was born prematurely and was small and delicate, causing worry in those early weeks. But she proved to be a fighter, growing stronger each day. She became the darling of the family, doted on by her older siblings and adored by her parents. That same year, Zane was elected mayor of Pinos Altos. He was reluctant at first, feeling he lacked the education and polish for such a position, but Tessa encouraged him. "You're honest, hardworking, and genuinely care about people," she said. "That's what makes a good leader, not fancy words or political connections." As mayor, Zane focused on practical improvements, better roads, a new school building, attracting a doctor to settle in town. He worked tirelessly to make Pinos Altos a good place to live and raise families. The 1890s brought challenges. A drought in 1893 hit the ranch hard, forcing Zane to sell off part of the herd and tighten their belts. But they weathered the hard times together, the family pulling together to survive. Thomas, now 15, took on even more responsibility, helping his father make difficult decisions about the ranch. Essie, at 11, kept the household running smoothly, helping her mother with the younger children and the endless domestic work. During these hard times, Tessa would sometimes take out her mother's ring, which she still wore on a chain around her neck, and remember how far they'd come. From a dusty trail outside Pinos Altos to a struggling but determined family facing drought, the journey had been long and not always easy, but it had been worth it. "We'll get through this," she told Zane one night when he sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, worried about money. "We've survived worse. I hate that you and the children have to do without. We're not doing without anything important. We have each other, we have this home, we have love. Everything else is just details." The drought finally broke in 1894, and the ranch began to recover. Zane rebuilt the herd slowly and carefully, learning from the hard lessons of the drought years. He diversified, adding horses to their operation, which proved to be a smart decision. In 1896, Thomas turned 18, and Zane made him a full partner in the ranch. They shook hands on it formally, though both had tears in their eyes. "You've earned this," Zane told his son. "This ranch will be yours someday, but until then we build it together." "I learned from the best," Thomas replied. "Everything I know about ranching, about being a man, I learned from watching you." That fall, Thomas began courting Sarah Johnson, the daughter of their neighbors. She was a sweet girl, hardworking and kind, and both Zane and Tessa approved of the match. Essie, at 14, was developing into a talented artist as well as seamstress. She sketched the landscapes around them, capturing the harsh beauty of New Mexico in pencil and charcoal. Zane bought her watercolors for Christmas, and she began painting, her work showing real talent. James, now 12, was finally settling down a bit, his wild energy channeled into working with the horses. He had a natural gift with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse with patience and kindness. Rose, at 7, was still the family's darling, but showing signs of the same strong will her mother possessed. She announced one day that she was going to be a doctor when she grew up, an ambitious goal for a girl in the 1890s, but neither Zane nor Tessa discouraged her. In the spring of 1898, Thomas and Sarah were married. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the town in attendance. It was a joyful celebration with music, dancing, and plenty of food. Watching Thomas dance with his new bride, Zane pulled Tessa close. "Hard to believe that's our baby boy, all grown up and starting his own family. We raised him well," Tessa said. "He'll be a good husband to Sarah. He learned from watching us. Then Sarah is a lucky woman." Thomas and Sarah built a small house on the ranch property, and Sarah became part of the family. She and Tessa worked well together, and Sarah brought a fresh energy to the household. In 1899, Sarah gave birth to Zane and Tessa's first grandchild, a boy they named Zachary. Holding his grandson for the first time, Zane felt the same overwhelming love he'd felt when Thomas was born, multiplied somehow by the wonder of a new generation. "Your great-grandmother's ring brought all of this into being," he whispered to the sleeping baby. Never underestimate the power of something small and precious. As the new century approached, Zane and Tessa found themselves reflecting on their life together. It was late December of 1899, and they were sitting on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. "It's been almost 27 years since you found my ring," Tessa said. "More than 23 years since we married. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we've been together forever." "Both are true, I think," Zane replied. "Every day with you feels new, but I also can't remember what life was like before you. Do you ever regret it, spending 3 years of your life searching for a stranger?" "Not for 1 second. Those 3 years led me to you. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "I love you, Zane Irwin. I loved you when you first handed me my mother's ring, and I love you more with every year that passes." "I love you too, Tessa. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life together full of love, challenge, joy, and meaning. As the calendar turned to 1900, Zane was 51 years old and Tessa was 49. They were grandparents, successful ranchers, respected members of their community. They had weathered droughts, economic hardships, the challenges of raising 4 children, and the inevitable struggles of life. But through it all, they had each other. The love that had begun with a ring found in the dust had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. It was a love built on respect, partnership, shared dreams, and the daily choice to cherish each other. Thomas and Sarah took on more of the ranch work, allowing Zane and Tessa to slow down a bit. They still worked hard, but they also made time to enjoy life, taking rides together across the land, sitting on the porch in the evenings, playing with their grandchildren. Essie's artwork began to gain recognition beyond Pinos Altos. She sold several paintings to a gallery in Santa Fe, and there was talk of an exhibition. She had also caught the eye of a young school teacher named Daniel who had recently moved to town. James, at 16, was becoming a fine horseman, known throughout the territory for his skill. He began training horses for other ranches, earning his own money and building a reputation. Rose, at 11, remained determined to become a doctor. She read every book on medicine she could get her hands on and helped care for sick animals on the ranch, practicing her skills. In 1901, Essie married Daniel, the school teacher, in a ceremony even more elaborate than Thomas's had been. Tessa cried through the entire wedding, happy tears at seeing her daughter so obviously loved and cherished. James left home in 1903, going to work on a large horse ranch in Wyoming. It was hard for Tessa to see him go, but she knew he needed to find his own way in the world. He wrote regularly, his letters full of enthusiasm for his work and the skills he was learning. Rose, with her parents' support and financial help from her brother Thomas, went away to school in 1907, preparing to eventually attend medical college. It was unusual for a woman, but times were changing and Rose was determined. By 1910, Zane was 61 and Tessa 59. They were officially retired from the ranch, though they still helped where they could. Thomas ran the operation with Sarah, and they had expanded it considerably, making it one of the most successful ranches in the area. Zane and Tessa had 3 grandchildren now: Zachary, who was 11 and already showing his father's ranching instincts, a granddaughter named Emma, who was 7 and reminded everyone of Essie at that age, and a new baby grandson named Victor, born just that spring. When Thomas told them the baby's name, Tessa had stiffened slightly. "I know your first husband had that name," Thomas said gently, "but it was also great-grandfather's name and I wanted to honor him. If it bothers you—" "No," Tessa said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "No, it's fine. Your great-grandfather was a good man. The name doesn't belong to Victor Walsh anymore. It belongs to this beautiful baby, and he'll make it mean something good." Essie and Daniel had 2 children, twin girls named Grace and Hope, who were 5 years old and full of mischief. James had married a woman named Catherine in Wyoming, and they had a son, though Tessa had only met them once when James brought them for a visit. She missed James terribly, but was proud of the life he'd built. Rose was in her 3rd year of medical school in Boston, writing letters full of fascinating details about her studies. She was the only woman in her class and faced considerable prejudice, but she was determined to succeed. One evening in the summer of 1910, Zane and Tessa sat on their porch, much as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost impossibly beautiful. "You remember what I said the night we first sat by the river in St. Louis?" Tessa asked. "About how I'd promised myself I'd never marry again. I remember. I'm so glad I broke that promise. These past 34 years with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me everything I never knew I needed: love, respect, partnership, a family, a home. You gave me myself back." Zane took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. "You gave me purpose. Before I found your ring, I was just drifting through life. But searching for you, finding you, building this life together that gave me meaning. You are my purpose, Tessa. You always have been. Tell me the story again," she said softly. "How you found my ring." It was a story they'd told countless times to each other, to their children, to their grandchildren, but Zane never tired of telling it. "It was a hot summer day in 1873, he began. "I was riding toward Pinos Altos, tired and dusty, thinking about nothing in particular. Then something caught my eye, a glint of gold in the dust. I almost rode past it, but something made me stop. I got down from my horse and picked up a small gold ring with flowers carved into it, and even though I didn't know who it belonged to, I knew right then that finding it was important. I knew I had to find the woman who had lost it." "And you did," Tessa whispered. "After 3 years of searching, you found me. I found you, and you changed my life in every way possible. That ring in the dust led me to the greatest treasure I could ever have hoped for: your love." They sat together as the stars began to appear, holding hands, their hearts full of gratitude for the life they'd shared and the love that had sustained them through everything. Zane and Tessa lived many more years, watching their children and grandchildren thrive, seeing their ranch prosper and their family grow. They never forgot the miracle of how they'd found each other: a ring in the dust, a cowboy determined enough to search for 3 years, and a woman brave enough to believe in love again. The ring itself, Tessa's most precious possession besides her family, remained on the chain around her neck until the day she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, with Zane holding her hand. It was then buried with her, having completed the circle lost in the dust, found by a devoted man, returned to its owner, and finally laid to rest with the woman who had cherished it. Zane lived another 3 years after Tessa's passing, cared for by his children and surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He died at 85, having lived a full and meaningful life. His last words were reported to be, "I'm coming, Tessa. Wait for me." The story of how Zane found a wedding ring in the dust and spent 3 years searching for its owner became a family legend, passed down through generations. It was told at family gatherings, shared with new spouses joining the family, recounted to children as they grew old enough to understand. The ranch remained in the family, passed down from Thomas to Zachary's children and beyond. Every generation knew the story of their great-great-grandparents and the love that had started with a small ring found in the dust of a New Mexico trail. It was a story about persistence, about the power of love, about how the smallest things can lead to the greatest joys. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we take for other people, and that true love is worth any amount of searching, any amount of time, any amount of sacrifice. In the end, Zane and Tessa's love story was about more than just a ring. It was about two people who found each other against impossible odds and chose each other every day for the rest of their lives. It was about respect, partnership, devotion, and the kind of deep, abiding love that weathers every storm and only grows stronger with time. Their descendants would look at old photographs of Zane and Tessa, seeing the love evident in the way they looked at each other, the way they stood close together, the way their hands always seemed to find each other. And they would tell the story again, keeping it alive, honoring the love that had started their family and shaped all their lives. Because in a harsh land where survival was often difficult and love could be scarce, Zane and Tessa had created something extraordinary. They had built a life based on kindness, respect, and devotion. They had raised children who knew what real love looked like and who passed that knowledge on to their own children. The ring in the dust had been the beginning, but what Zane and Tessa built together was so much more than gold and flowers carved into metal. They built a legacy of love that would endure for generations, a testament to the power of determination, the importance of kindness, and the transformative nature of true love. And if you traveled to New Mexico even now, to the area around Pinos Altos, you might still find descendants of Zane Irwin and Tessa Walsh working the land, raising families, living lives of purpose and meaning. And if you ask them about their family history, they would smile and tell you a story that sounds almost like a fairy tale, but is absolutely true. They would tell you about a cowboy who found a wedding ring in the dust and spent 10 years searching for the woman who lost it. They would tell you about a widow who thought she was done with love, but found it again with a man who showed her what real devotion looked like. They would tell you about a family built on a foundation of love so strong that it lasted not just a lifetime but generations. And in the telling, the story would live on, inspiring others to believe in the power of love, the importance of persistence, and the miracle of two hearts finding each other even when the odds seem impossible. Because some love stories are too beautiful, too powerful, too meaningful to ever be forgotten. And the love story of Zane and Tessa was exactly that kind of story, the kind that endures, the kind that matters, the kind that changes not just two lives but countless lives that follow. Their love had been a gift first to each other, then to their children, and ultimately to all who heard their story and were inspired by it. It was a reminder that in a world that can be harsh and unforgiving, love still matters, kindness still matters, devotion still matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find a ring in the dust that leads you to everything you never knew you needed. The final chapter of their story was written not in their deaths, but in the lives they touched, the family they created, and the love they shared for more than 5 decades. It was written in the ranch that still bore their mark, in the town they had helped build, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward into a new century. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines around Pinos Altos and the sunset painted the mountains in gold and purple, some folks swore you could still feel the presence of that love, strong, enduring, and eternal. The kind of love that starts with a small act of kindness and grows into something that can never truly die, because it lives on in every heart it touches, in every life it changes, in every generation it inspires. That was the legacy of Zane Irwin and Tessa Walsh, the cowboy who found a ring and the woman who found love again. A legacy written not in gold or glory, but in the simple, profound truth that love, real, devoted, unwavering love, is the greatest treasure anyone can ever hope to find. And it all started with a ring in the dust, glinting in the summer sunlight, waiting for someone to notice, to care, to begin a journey that would change two lives and create a story worth telling for generations to come.